So now let's go into depression. First of all, let me say that the problem with many of us working with depressed people is that we don't pay attention enough, and especially psychologists, I think. We've got to take a look at other causes of depression or depressive symptoms. And oftentimes we don't take a look, especially in our system, where we can collaborate with the primary care physician. We see somebody's on some blood pressure medication, and we go, God, of course he's depressed. How much blood pressure medication is he on? Or, my God, he's anxious, and he's on the steroids, and he's inhaling, and all. You got to screen out all that stuff, and we don't do that enough, and we trust that the physician is really paying attention to that. They're not. In our system, as collaborative as that might be, they got 6 minutes, person's in and out, and nobody's paying attention to that. So all these systems have to be paid attention to. So if you're taking a look at, and this is going to be relevant in a couple slides from now, this dysphoric kind of sense of anhedonia. So when you're taking a look at how somebody's energetic system is sort of out of whack, and how their circadian rhythm is out of sequence, you've really got to help them change their entire system. It's not just about talking about rewiring the way they think about something, a la CBT. It's about the entire physiological system with depression. And here's a repetitive slide about SSRI and the bottom-up portion of it. And I hope we convinced you, and we do in other areas, that too much has been made of the effectiveness of SSRIs. And one quick way to kind of summarize this is that placebos almost get as much efficacy as SSRIs, about 10% less. In fact, not only this, but we also have found that serotonin itself actually is a double-edged sword, because one of the treatments for depression in Europe hasn't been FDA approved here, is a medication called, I hope I can pronounce it right, trieniptine, that lowers serotonin. Whoa! Well, if serotonin's the problem and a medication lowers serotonin, and people are getting better as a result of that, what's going on with the serotonin hypothesis? There's other neurodynamic aspects that we also want to pay attention to, because it's not like a person just gets into depression via some of the more conventional sort of tracks that we've paid attention to before. How about stress-induced depression? Davison and his group have paid somewhat attention to this. There's a really good book that he edited called Depression and Anxiety. I think it was Oxford University Press. That I think is really a good one. Take a look at what happens after a period of intense stress, 90 minutes after the stress. Levels of dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin go down. Well, what happens when you have lower dopamine? You have less physical activity. You stay with that, you can kindle a depression. And interestingly, when you have less of that, less activation in your left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, then you have the sort of a general inability to inhibit negative affect. And then you have, because of the less activation in your left prefrontal cortex, relative more activation on your right prefrontal cortex, boom, depression. This is stress-induced depression and a neurodynamic track to that. Remember, I was saying that states become traits, importing from complexity theory, from attractors that were weak attractors initially become strong attractors eventually. In terms of asymmetric activation, like relative right versus left, you can create depression via stress-induced depression if you cultivate it by simple withdrawal after a stressful event. So why do we tell people that, oh my God, I want to soothe my, it's been really a tough week and I just want to close up shop and close the drapes and all that kind of stuff and soothe myself a little bit. Yeah, you want to cultivate a depression? That's a good way to do it. Lloyd mentioned earlier that a lot of studies have suggested that there is a bit, with up to 19% of chronically depressed people, reduction in hippocampal size. Some people are suggesting that perhaps what's going on there is a reduced amount of Miracle-Gro. Again, brain-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF. And if you got anxiety going on as a comorbid substrate here, then you got more opportunity to erode the entire system and fall into a deeper depression. What's one of the best ways to get Miracle-Gro going again? Everybody that's depressed, I have walk. It's one of the baseline, you know, you take 20 people, 10 of them walk that are depressed, the other 10 don't walk, the 10 that walk get less depressed, study after study. Yeah, and as I was just noting, it's partly related to brain-derived neurotropic factor, regenesis of the hippocampus, because really what we have with depression is a lowering of your ability to access memories about what you were before you got depressed, because memory is state-based in some ways. So the literature, as I understand it, and I was mentioning earlier this really nice popular book called Spark by John Ratley. But there's a whole lot of other literature that I've read most recently that suggests that absolutely exercise is one of the best ways to increase serotonin levels, dopamine, and norepinephrine. I say over and over again, with my model of the brain and all that, sitting on there, that, you know what, you got hardly anything going on in your left prefrontal cortex. You're depressed, you're withdrawn. What are we going to do? You got too much going on in your right prefrontal cortex, not anything going on in your left prefrontal cortex. That's what we know about depression. So what does that mean? You mean I got to do stuff? Absolutely. And what you got to do in many ways is what I call planting seeds. One thing you need to do is get out and make social contact, because there's plenty of data that suggests that there are neurochemical changes that take place when we're with other people. So that's really the social input. Planting seeds, another mnemonic. S is for social medicine, as I call it. Exercise, a staple. So making an effort, doing something. There you got the E. Education, meaning learn about what we're talking about. If you just sit around and soothe yourself endlessly, that's not good. So that's the second E. Diet, absolutely important. Everybody I see, I ask them what they're eating, whether or not they're skipping breakfast, whatever it is, and I get them on a proper diet. And then I pay very close attention to sleep dynamics and talk about sleep hygiene. Planting seeds is like the foundation for everything. So whether or not they're depressed or anxious, I talked about that, and especially with regard to depression. Well, this is a couple very good summary slides about depression. Real good book, very readable, written by somebody named Lambert. I think her name is Kelly Lambert, called Lifting Depression. Excellent book, very readable. She highlights, in many ways, some of the literature related to what is called the effort-driven reward system and depression. What does it involve? The nucleus accumbens. The nucleus accumbens is the pleasure module of the brain in the deep within the forebrain. The striatum. Remember the striatum that we were talking about earlier with the caudate and the putamen. If you get low levels of affect and all that, you get sluggish. You don't do much. Slow motor movement and all that. And poor concentration relative to the PFC, prefrontal cortex. So what do you do? So if those systems are out of sync, meaning they drag you down and get you depressed, what do you do? Well, we need to get the PFC activated again so you can plan an activity. And then actually do it, because the striatum gets activated when you actually do it. And then when you get some sense of enjoyment, I often say, well, you know, go to a movie. If you get 5 minutes of enjoyment out of an hour-and-a-half movie, that's 5 minutes you wouldn't have got had you not gone. So you get them out there planning to go to the movie, then you've got them actually doing it, and then a little bit of enjoyment, and then you start to activate and kindle and wire that activity reward system. So with regard to brain-based therapy, and incorporating all these dynamics in our effort to help people get out of a rumination of what goes on, adding in a mindful being present, so to speaking. You don't need to get all new agey and everything, and you don't need to call it mindfulness or whatever, but teaching them to focus and be present, actually, as Lloyd was talking about with Zindel Siegel and his studies, and Teasdale as well in England. In a sense, what you're doing is you're detaching from the ruminations. People that are depressed ruminate endlessly. The past, the past, the past, the past, the past. By detaching and observing yourself, kind of like with OCD, and you go, oh, that's that depressive rumination again. Calling it the depressive rumination is a way of detaching from it. They need to detach from it rather than bathe in it. That's the big problem. The way we kind of conceive this whole brain-based therapy kind of thing is kind of like Linux, you know, or Wikipedia. We don't have any delusions that we're the next gurus around and all that garbage. We're not into that kind of stuff. It's so incredibly exciting. I've now written 12 books. And I'm not saying that to be pompous at all. I never spent any time talking about what I was into before, but now I am, because I'm just so excited about it. I think this is the next big sea change, and I can't get enough of it. I'm reading all the time, and I'm activated. And being the director of essentially the largest training program in the country, I'm coming across people always being trained in this and that. We've got about 120 trainees going through our system every year. I was kind of getting okay, maybe I ought to write a novel or something. Until I reactivated myself in interest in this particular area, and I just can't stop reading. So your contribution and our involvement in this whole enterprise together, I think, is really what's going to make it exciting, rather than some latest guru that's going to go to the Evolution of Psychotherapy conference and have a bunch of groupies hanging around and all that. That's silly.